now joined by NASCAR Senior Vice President for Racing Innovation, John Probst. Our first question for John is going to come from Jim Utter. Go ahead with your question, Jim.
Hey, John. I had asked this question of Steve earlier, and he suggested I ask you for your opinion as well. I just wondered if you could describe a little bit how the process of next gen changed or evolved because of the stoppage of related to the COVID pandemic. I know obviously you were going to debut the car this season. Did the extra time help in some respects? Did it also hurt in some others?
All right. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. I don't hear myself, but so the first part on how did COVID affect the project? When COVID hit, we were actually early on when COVID hit, we were in a point of the project where a lot of what we were doing was largely in the CAD simulation space. So we were able to continue for a little while. And then as some of the key suppliers to the project started getting shut down, we found ourselves in a phase of the project where we were leading into the submissions for the OEMs. And when we do that, that requires the OEMs and NASCAR to be together, you know, when we do the wind tunnel testing, when we prep the cars at the R&D center. And when we got to the point where we could no longer co-locate or even be near each other, that's when sort of the reality of, you know, the seriousness of what was going on. That was pretty early on right after, you know, the Atlanta race was canceled due to the COVID outbreak. And I think that's when we kind of knew that, you know, we were in a position where we weren't going to be able to soldier through it, and came to the realization that we needed to start figuring out contingencies. And then obviously the likely outcome and the eventual outcome was we were delaying it till 2022. I think that, you know, did it help or did it hurt? I don't know. It feels today like it probably helped. It gave us a little extra time to get some more testing on the car. A lot of our vendors, including us, were able to probably work more normal hours. I would say that we were prepared along with our vendor base to deliver that car in 2021, but it would have required a lot of long nights from just about everybody involved in the project. And, you know, the 2021 or the 2022 launch, excuse me, feels like we're still very busy, but I think that if we all look back and reflected, we're probably doing it in a more sustainable workload with respect to everybody's workload.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Our next question is going to come from Kelly Crandall. Go ahead with the question, Kelly.
Thank you. Hey, John, can you take us inside the safety testing that I'm assuming you've done already? What have you seen? What have those numbers been like on the safety side?
Yeah, I'd say, you know, like I said, today is a milestone for us in releasing the cars. We still are in the process of testing the car. The car's being tested right now in Texas. There's a lot of safety stuff that has already been done. We've leaned on a lot of our history with respect to the development of the current Gen 6 car. We've implemented some state-of-the-art simulation tools that have let us do things that we have not been able to do in the past, as well as a lot of subcomponent testing to where, you know, we're correlating the model from design to the testing that we had done in the lab. And from that perspective, you know, on our end, we've actually as well simulated some of the bigger incidents that we've had with the current Gen 6 car on the next gen car. I'd say that we're pretty happy with where we're at. I won't get into the specifics of where we're at, and, you know, we still have some testing yet to come, and, you know, we're 8 months out. Well, we will be 8 months out when we complete up all that testing from the debut in 2022. We feel like we're in a good place. So yeah, that'd be my answer to that one.
Our next question will come from Bob Pockers. Go ahead with the question, Bob.
Yeah, John, kind of wanted to follow up on that. When Byron crashed the car, did it do kind of what you expected it to do? And have you done like an actual like crash test with it? And can you kind of just summarize if it did what you expected?
Yeah, I'd say all of the testing that we've done to date, and that is one of the incidents that we have simulated, I'd say the car is performed as expected. No surprises on our end. So yeah, no surprises from our side of it. We feel really good where we're at And I think that, you know, as we get closer to next year, we'll share some more on that front with you guys. I think we've made some really big strides on that front.
Our next question will come from Jerry Jordan. Go ahead with the question, Jerry. Jerry, we can't hear you, my friend. Jerry, you may be on mute.
I know all about the mute button, and the longer it takes to find it, the more you panic. So,
Jerry, why don't you do me a favor? Send me your question. We're going to move on next to Louis Frank. Go ahead with your question, Louis.
Yes, good afternoon, John. Steve referred me to you too on this. You turn on nightly news and OEMs have a chip shortage for passenger cars, trucks. Any of your vendors suffering, and will this have any impact on the rollout of the next gen car?
From our perspective, no. We may have vendors that have been impacted by it, but they're not, you know, impacted with respect to the parts and pieces they're providing for us. You know, we're already starting to make deliveries to the race teams now of parts and pieces. That'll culminate middle of June when we start delivering chassis to the teams. But I think we're largely isolated from that, in part because, you know, while the car is a clean sheet, there is a reasonable amount of carryover parts on the car, and all of the electrical parts or electronic parts that could be impacted by that are carryover. So a lot of the inventory that's already in our garage is reusable on this car. So, you know, I can't say if it would, you know, loosely impact a team later in the year trying to, you know, go to a test and not being able to get a hold of sensors or something like that. But as far as any material impact on what we're doing, there's no sign of that today, and we don't anticipate that moving forward.
Thanks.
Our next question is going to come from Chris Pickering. Go ahead with the question, Chris.
Thank you. Hi, Don. You mentioned earlier that you used some new or different simulation techniques. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that's changed the development process?
Yeah, certainly. I'd say that, and I alluded to it a little bit in my opening comments today in the press release, but we're able to use a tool called LS Dyna, which is a tool widely used by the OEMs to do a lot of their crash simulations. And if you look at sort of how the industry's gone, you know, a lot of times the testing you do as you go through a development project, such as we've done here, and, you know, we obviously have our OEMs along with us here, lending a lot of their experience to what we do. You find yourself designing a lot on the front end, going through iterations. We went through countless iterations of the car, simulating all these different events that we've seen over the years just to evaluate how the car's performed. And, you know, when you lean on a lot of our OEMs experience in that world, as well as, you know, we have a really in-depth database of our own, over 2,500 events now that we compare the cars to. I think that from a tool perspective, we're able to validate sort of as we go, and as all of the little bits and pieces validate themselves as we go through the design process, there really is an expectation for, you know, no surprises out the back end when we finally do the full entire car crash in June.
Thank you.
Our next question will come from Jerry Jordan. Go ahead and try again, Jerry.
Hey, sorry about that. I had my backup mute button on for iRacing. So, but no, seriously, about the power plant and where the OEMs are going regarding that issue. What is NASCAR's plan for future advancements in the engine and things of that nature? Because at some point in the next 15 years, we won't probably see an internal combustion engine on the showroom floor.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's probably a little bit beyond the scope of today, but, you know, I would say that we obviously, the word collaboration you heard used over and over today. And I think that when you look at our relationship with our OEMs, that when it comes to alternative powertrains, whether that be, you know, hybrid of some form or electric or hydrogen combustion, you know, you name it, and you hit the nail on the head there. There is a very aggressive development in the direction of change, you know, away from internal combustion engines. We are very aware of that. We have also, you know, been very open that, you know, we'd like to see more OEMs come into our sport. We know that to do that, we need to be looking in that direction. We actively engage our current OEMs and potential OEMs all the time on where they want to go with respect to that. We mentioned it, that this car protects for a lot of what we could anticipate coming out in the near future. So I feel like we're in a good spot to react as needed.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Our next question is going to come from Kelvin LaPierre. Go ahead with your question, Kelvin.
Thanks, Matt. Congrats again on the new car cut that you just unveiled today. With these 3 cars now being released and you actually being fans able to see them, have you been in communication with other manufacturers in case they want to jump on board now that they see that these cars look more like the stock cars that win on Sunday, buy on Monday type, like a Dodge, BMW, or any of them? How fast would you be able to get them in if they did want to jump on board?
Good question. Like I said earlier, we talked to all of them, and I can say that some of them have been very willing to provide feedback on this car for us. Obviously, off to the side, they're not in the middle of what we're doing, and may, for one reason or another, not want to be associated with it at this point. But I can say that we've had a lot of OEM feedback on this car. Probably not ready to announce anything that we've been discussing with anything other than the 3 OEMs that we have in our sport today that are obviously very important partners to us. And I think that if a new OEM did want to come in to our sport, we're probably beyond the time where they'd be able to do that for 2022.
All right, thank you.
Our next question is going to come from Jason Beck. Go ahead with your question, Jason.
Yeah, so my question is similar to Kelly's, but in a more generalized way. We saw in the 80s with the modified division, when cars were too stiff, they hurt drivers. And then, more recently, we've seen some issues with like Ryan Newman's car or Joey's where cages deform a little bit. So when you design a race car, how do you get that right balance between crush zones and deflection and having a car that's too stiff? And kind of what was the thought process when you built this one from a clean sheet?
Yeah, certainly, from our perspective, when we started to design the car, we looked at, obviously right fronts into the wall. It's a very common accident case for us. We looked at roof crush. So in the case of, the Joey incident or the Newman incident, we look at T-bones. We look at all kinds of impacts that we can anticipate are likely in our sport. And, like I was saying earlier, we have well over 2,500 now recordable incidents that we plot on a picture a car in plan view, looking straight down on it. When you do a little plot of all the accidents that we've ever experienced that have been recordable events, meaning something that's, had an impact level that actually turns the data recorder on. So generally anything that would damage the car in some way or the other will be recorded. I think that we can then start to design the car, like I said, iteratively going through those scenarios, trying to evaluate how would this car perform compared to the current car. We feel like the current car is in a very good state with respect to driver safety. So, when you look at the new car, it's a balance between, I think you hit it on the head, of stiffness, because you don't want the intrusion typically, especially in the center section of the car. So generally the main direction of anything that would harm the driver is generally from a intrusion perspective. Certainly with safer barriers and things of that nature nowadays, we've tried to attempt to, as best possible, mitigate the things that could impact the driver from a crush or the lack of crush perspective. This new car, implements a lot of front and rear crash structures that have been through that process and tested pretty heavily on the sort of rear at the clip level. So we've taken the car to some of the test labs that all the OEMs use and have run them at load and at speed into walls. So, you're right. It is a balance between all of that. We feel like we have a pretty good solution where we're at right now. And obviously we'll validate that out the other end. If we see anything out of that we don't like, we'll address it.
Thank you.
Our final question for John is going to come from Marty Sikala. Go ahead with the question, Marty.
Thanks, Matt. Mr. Probst, thanks for your time and congratulations on a big day for the sport. I joined in late, so I apologize if this was already talked about, but I was wondering if you could talk about the composite bodies a little bit, and what led to that change going from, I think, the steel bodies from the Gen 6 to composite, and how that'll help the drivers race a little bit more aggressive in that part.
Yeah, it's a good question. We had not talked about it beyond just mentioning it in the media event that we had earlier. When you look at bodies in our sport, a few years ago, we implemented a composite body in the Xfinity series. And we feel like by and large, that's gone over really well. If you take the scenarios of, a championship race when it was at Homestead, and a lot of times you guys have probably seen it, drivers that are able to ride the wall generally are faster, especially late in a run and as we go into the night there. And it feels like, an Xfinity guy with a composite body was able to make contact with the wall and continue on without really any ill effects. Even from my team side, I can say that, you can be dominating at Homestead and have a little brush against the wall with a sheet metal body, and you get that little bit of deformation that, almost like a soda can or something that you'd smash. Like once you lose the shape, you run the potential, I guess, that you could help the car, and you see that occasionally, but more than not, you hurt the car and you really impact your day and your performance. We see it also when cars get together. You'll see a lot of times the damage will impact the performance of the car as they move forward, but then also a lot of times you'll see flat tires result from that. That's another thing we haven't talked a whole lot about, is we've tried to inset the tires a little bit off the body so that they're not the first point of contact. We feel like we'll make some progress there. Will it be perfect? No, you're still going to be able to find a way to hit a car and have an issue with your tire. But in particular, the composite body in Cup is something that we took the lessons learned from the Xfinity project that we did several years into making now. Because in the Cup series, we're able to use some more advanced materials with respect to the carbon layups. We've now been able to, and the vendor has demonstrated this through very non-scientific methods so far, of front end loaders smashing body panels into the parking lot. You can actually see the body panel return to near original shape with some pretty significant hits from the front end loader. So I feel like from a bumping, banging, getting up into the wall, the bodies themselves will be able to survive some pretty significant impacts, be it with another driver and or the wall. And I feel like that's only good for our fans, because we're going to see a lot of their favorite drivers stay in events that, in prior generations of our body would have probably meant the end of their day, certainly the end of their competitive day.
Definitely. Congratulations again, sir. Thanks for the time. I'm looking forward to seeing this car in 22.
Thank you.
Thanks, John, for joining us, and we'll see you down the road. Take care now.
Thank you all.